Welcome back, friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to Benjamin and Ellie's story. It's a very enjoyable story, so stay with us until the end. Enjoy the show. Benjamin woke to the sound of his own ship politely informing him that he was going to die. It wasn't screaming, which was the disturbing part. He'd have preferred screaming. Screaming felt appropriate. Instead, a serene female voice drifted through the flickering dark of the corridor, the kind of voice you'd expect to announce that your latte was ready, saying, "Cabin pressure nominal. Oxygen reserves at 11%. Have a pleasant cycle." Then the lights stuttered, an alarm gargled somewhere deep in the walls like a dying kettle, and the whole vessel groaned around him as though it too resented being awake. He sat up. Big mistake. His skull informed him in the strongest possible terms that he had recently made contact with something hard, fast, and unforgiving. The escape pod's bulkhead, if the smear of dried blood on his sleeve was to be believed. Fragments came back in the wrong order. The distress beacon, the nebula swelling in the viewport like a bruise made of light, purple and gold and impossibly vast. The research vessel Meridian dead in the water, drifting through all that glow with her running lights out. And him, brilliant engineer that he was, deciding that boarding a ghost ship to salvage parts was a perfectly reasonable way to spend an afternoon. "Okay," he told the ceiling. Note to self. Next time the ship looks haunted, it's haunted. The ceiling did not reply. The ship did, though, in the form of another lurch and a hiss of atmosphere venting from somewhere it very much should not have been venting from. 11%. He'd done the math before he'd meant to, an old engineer's reflex like flinching. 11%, one lung-owning human, no functioning life support, and a nebula between him and any hope of rescue thick enough to swallow a signal whole. Call it 4 days. Maybe 5 if he stopped making jokes, which was frankly never going to happen. He hauled himself up by a dead handrail and started limping toward what the schematic in his memory insisted was the engineering bay. Every panel he passed was a small tragedy, coolant lines fractured, a relay board fused into modern art. The Meridian hadn't just broken down. Something had hurt her, deliberately, with the patient cruelty of a professional. He was still cataloging the damage, muttering the running commentary that had annoyed every colleague he'd ever had, when he rounded the corner into the bay and discovered he was not, in fact, the last living thing aboard. The blade arrived at his throat approximately 1 heartbeat before his brain finished processing that there was a person attached to it. She had come out of the shadows the way a thought arrives. There was nothing, and then there was everything, and no honest account of the in-between. A woman, lean and coiled and utterly still, holding a knife against his windpipe with the relaxed competence of someone who considered this the least interesting thing she'd done all week. The nebula's light pouring through the viewport washed over her, and for one absurd, dislocated second he forgot about the knife entirely, because she was, well, distracting was a cowardly word for it, but he was going with it, because the alternative words all had more syllables than a man with a knife at his throat should risk. Her ears were the tell. Long, tapered, sweeping back into her dark hair in a graceful point. Elf-cut, storybook sharp. The single feature that marked her as something other than the very human, very lethal expression she was currently aiming at him. "You're breathing my air," she said, flat. No inflection, a statement of inventory. "Technically," Benjamin managed, which was a heroic amount of syllable given the circumstances, "it's the ship's air. I'm just borrowing, I'll return it." Slightly used. The knife did not move. Neither did her expression, which was a masterpiece of nothing, cold, guarded, a door with the hinges welded shut. But something flickered behind her eyes. Not amusement. He wasn't lucky enough for amusement. More like the mild irritation of a person who'd braced for a threat and gotten a comedian instead. "You're the beacon," she said. "The idiot who answered a distress call in a dead nebula." "I prefer Good Samaritan. But idiot works. We can circle back." He risked a glance at the ruined console behind her, then back to her face, and let the grin fall away because the numbers didn't care how charming he was. That readout back there says 11% and dropping, which means whatever you are and whatever I am, we've both got the same very short problem. He spread his hands, slow, harmless. I'm an engineer. You look like someone who's kept herself alive in worse rooms than this. Point that somewhere else, and maybe neither of us finds out what the void tastes like. For a long moment she studied him, weighing something he couldn't see. Then the knife lowered an inch, just an inch. Ellie, she said like it cost her, and if you're lying about the engineering human, I'll open this airlock myself. It turned out that Ellie's idea of helping and Benjamin's idea of helping occupied roughly the same solar system, if you squinted, but they orbited very different suns. His involved talking. Hers involved a granite silence so total that he'd started narrating the repairs himself just to keep from feeling like the last man in a very cold universe. And here we have the primary oxygenator, he said, elbow deep in a wall panel that smelled of burnt insulation and old regret. Or as I like to call it, the reason we're both still verbing. Nouns. Whatever. Low oxygen, the grammar's the first thing to go. He tugged a scorched cable free and held it up like a fisherman displaying his catch. See this? This is deliberate. Nobody's coolant line dies this neat by accident. Someone came in here with a very small torch and a very large grudge. Across the bay, Ellie crouched over the auxiliary junction, sorting through a tool kit she'd clearly rifled before he arrived, and said nothing. She had a way of not answering that was louder than most people's answers. He was beginning to catalog her silences the way he cataloged damaged systems. This one meant I already knew that, and that one meant asterisk stop talking, and the rare, precious one meant say the next part. He hadn't earned the third yet, he was working on it. You did it, he said, not a question, watching her over the ruined console. The sabotage, you wrecked her yourself. The pause was a confession. Enough of her to strand whoever was chasing me, she said finally. I didn't plan on someone answering the beacon it triggered. Ah, so I'm an unforeseen consequence. He clipped two leads together, and a bank of dead indicators sputtered reluctantly toward amber. My mother said that about me too. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile. He wanted to be clear with himself about that, because he was an honest man and a smile would have been overselling it. But it was an asterisk rumor of a smile, the geological precursor to one, the sort of thing that took 10,000 years and enormous pressure to become the real thing. He decided to consider it a win and said nothing, which was, he suspected, the only correct move he'd made all day. They worked, and slowly, grudgingly, the asterisk Meridian worked back. He rerouted power through a spine of conduits that had no business carrying a current, cursing each one by name, while Ellie proved, without a word of instruction, that she knew her way around a plasma coupler better than most people he'd been paid to work beside. She anticipated him. He'd reach for a tool and it would already be there, pressed into his palm before he asked, and every time it happened she'd withdraw her hand fast, like touching him too long might leave a mark she couldn't scrub off. You've done ship work, he said. I've done a lot of things. Flat again, the welded door. Assassin then. He said it lightly, testing, and watched her go very still. The moving out of shadows thing. The knife you hold like it's part of your hand. The way you scanned every exit in this room before you scanned me. He shrugged, threading a fresh line. I fix things for a living. You get good at recognizing what a thing was built for. For a moment he thought he'd pushed too far, that the door would stay welded and the silence would go back to being the loud kind. Then she spoke, quiet and even, still looking at the junction and not at him. Bred for it, she said. Not trained, bred. There's a difference and it's the whole difference. She tightened a fitting with more force than it needed. Everyone I've ever let close is dead now. Everyone. That's not self-pity, human, that's a data set. She finally looked up and the nebula's glow pooled in her eyes and made them almost unbearable. So here's the arrangement. We fix the air. We survive. And you don't do the thing your face keeps threatening to do. A breath. Don't fall in love with me, human. People who love me die. It's the only reliable thing about me. Benjamin considered this. He considered the 11%, now a slightly less murderous 14. He considered the impossible ears and the granite silences, and the hand that kept flinching away from his. He considered that he was, by all available evidence, exactly the kind of idiot who answered distress calls in dead nebulae. He smiled, the real thing, the one his mother had warned people about. "It's too late," he said, and went back to fixing the air, whistling, while behind him Ellie stared at the back of his head like he was a system she couldn't diagnose, a fault code she'd never seen, something that had come into her ruined ship and refused stubbornly to break the way everything else always had. Days aboard a dying ship have no shape. There's no dawn to lean against, no dusk to fold the hours shut, only the slow arithmetic of the oxygen readout and the nebula wheeling past the viewport, patient and enormous and utterly uninterested in whether they lived. So they made their own time. Benjamin measured it in repairs. Ellie measured it in the distance she kept, which shrank, corridor by corridor, in increments so small he pretended not to notice for fear she'd notice him noticing and rebuild the whole wall. They rationed the galley's stores, dubious protein bricks that Benjamin insisted on reviewing aloud like a food critic sentenced to purgatory. Ah, the taupe one. Notes of cardboard, a bold finish of despair. Pairs well with imminent asphyxiation. Ellie ate hers in 3 efficient bites and watched him perform, and one shift, without a word, she traded him her ration of the slightly less terrible gray brick for his taupe, and it was such a small mercy, and such an enormous one that he had to look at the wall for a second before he trusted his voice. The silences changed. That was the thing he clung to. Early on they'd been fortifications. Now sometimes they were just quiet, 2 people in a room, breathing the same thinning air, not needing to fill it. He learned the grammar of her stillness the way he'd learned every ship he'd ever served. He knew when she was calculating exits. He knew when she was somewhere far away and long ago. And he was learning slowly, the rarest one. The stillness that meant she was letting him stay. It leaked out of her in fragments, her story, always at the wrong moments, wrist-deep in a coolant line or passing him a tool in the dark. Bred in a facility that didn't name its children because names were for things you meant to keep. Trained to be a solution to other people's problems. She'd run, eventually, the way water runs, not out of courage, she said, but because a thing built to survive will survive, even survive its own makers. And everyone who'd sheltered her, believed her, reached for her, gone. A trail of kind people who'd made the fatal error of mattering to her. "You keep saying it like a warning," Benjamin said one shift. The 2 of them sprawled in the guts of the ventilation trunk, shoulder to shoulder because there was no other way to fit. "The people who love you die, but you're leaving something out of the data set." AMI flat, but she didn't move away. "You're not counting the ones who died asterisk for asterisk you. There's a difference and it's the whole difference." He handed her line back to her gently and felt her go still against his shoulder. "Sounds to me like nobody you let close ever regretted it. Sounds to me like they chose. That's not a curse, Ellie. That's just love doing what love does. It's terrible at self-preservation. Ask any engineer, worst designed system in the universe. No off switch." She didn't answer. But she didn't leave either, and in the close dark of the trunk he could feel the warmth of her arm the whole length of his, and neither of them adjusted, and the ship hummed its half-repaired hum around them like something holding its breath. The glances were the worst of it or the best. He couldn't decide. They caught each other. That was the only honest way to say it. He'd look up from a panel and find her already watching, and she'd look away a half-second too slow, and the half-second was everything, was a confession neither of them was reckless enough to sign. Once, reaching past her for a coupler, his hand closed over hers on the tool and she didn't pull away. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to feel that her hands, which had done terrible precise things, were shaking, very slightly, at his touch. You could stop, she said quietly, not looking at him. Doing this, whatever this is, it would be smarter. Almost certainly, he agreed. I've got a real gift for the unsmart move. Answered a distress call in a dead nebula, didn't I? He turned the coupler over in their joined hands, unhurried. I keep waiting to be scared of you, you know. Everybody warns me. You warn me. And I keep not managing it. It's very inconvenient. Ruins my whole reputation as a coward. Something broke loose in her face then. Not the geological rumor of a smile from before, but the real thing, sudden and unguarded and gone almost before it arrived, like a light through a door swinging shut. It undid him more than any weapon could have. You're an idiot, Benjamin, she said. Yeah, he said and grinned because she'd used his name and she'd never once used his name. But I'm your idiot. Now hand me the torque driver before we suffocate flirting. She laughed. It startled them both. And somewhere in the walls the oxygen ticked 1 point higher. The scanner found them the way bad news always does, quietly, at the exact moment things had started to feel survivable. Benjamin was flat on his back under the helm console, arguing with a navigation array that had opinions about being resurrected, when the display above him chirped. A single, cheerful, catastrophic little sound. He almost ignored it, almost filed it under the ship's endless repertoire of dying noises. Then he saw Ellie's face, and the temperature of the whole room changed. She'd gone completely still. Not the faraway stillness, not the letting him stay stillness. This was older. This was the stillness he'd first met with a knife at his throat, and worse, because now he knew her well enough to see the thing underneath it, and the thing underneath it was fear. What, he said, sliding out from under the console. Ellie, what is it? Contact? Her voice had gone flat and precise, an instrument reading itself out. One vessel, vectoring in from the nebula's edge, running dark but not dark enough. She stared at the blip crawling across the display like it was a countdown of a different kind. That's not a rescue, human. Rescue doesn't run silent. Scavengers. He said it hoping she'd correct him. She didn't. And that told him the rest before she said it. Not scavengers, not random ones. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides, the knuckles pale. That flight profile, that approach. They're not here for the ship. She turned to look at him, and the nebula's glow that had made her beautiful for 3 days now just made her look haunted. They're here for me. It's a retrieval crew. My makers don't lose inventory, Benjamin. They recover *it. He wanted a joke. He reached for one out of reflex, the way he'd been reaching for them his whole life, a hand groping in the dark for the familiar shape of the thing that made fear survivable. And for the first time since he'd woken on this ship, he came back empty. There was nothing funny in the room. There was just the blip, and the oxygen at a hard 160% that suddenly meant nothing, and Ellie looking at him like she'd already begun the arithmetic of losing him. Then we fight them, he said. Or we hide. Or we finish the drive and we run, we've got the ship half. No, she said it too fast. Run, you stay. She was already moving, checking the knife at her hip, pulling herself back into the coiled, deadly shape she'd been when he met her, folding away everything the last 3 days had softened. There's a shuttle in the aft bay. I sabotaged it, but I can unsabotage it. You lock yourself in engineering, you tell them a lone engineer answered a beacon, you know nothing, you saw nothing. They want me. Once I'm gone, you're just salvage. Uninteresting, alive. Ellie, this is the part I told you about. She rounded on him, and her voice cracked down the middle, and it was so much worse than the flatness. This is the part where the people close to me die. I warned you. I warned you on the first day over the coolant line. I said don't. She stopped, breathed. Rebuilt the wall in real time, brick by brick, right in front of him. I have spent my entire life being the reason good people don't get to be old. I am not adding you to the list. I won't, not you. And there it was, the confession she'd never signed at last in the worst possible ink. Not you. 2 words that meant he'd gotten in, all the way in, past the welded door, and the only proof he was ever going to get was her trying to throw herself into the void to keep him out of it. He crossed the room. She let him, which frightened him more than the blip did. He took her hands, the terrible, precise, faintly trembling hands, and he held them and he made her look at him. "You've got the data set wrong," he said, very quietly, no joke in it, nothing but the truth he'd been circling for 3 days. "You keep counting the dying. You never once counted whether it was worth it. You don't get to decide that for me, Ellie. That's mine. I answered the call. I stayed. I chose. Every single day on this dead ship I chose asterisk, and I'd choose it again with the oxygen at 0. He tightened his grip. "You are not a curse. You're the best thing that ever came at me with a knife. And I am not going to lock myself in a room and let you fly off to die politely so I can be uninteresting." Her eyes were wet. She was furious about it. "You'll die." "Maybe," he admitted, "but not because I loved you, because some people with bad manners are boarding our ship." He almost smiled, almost. "Big difference, it's the whole difference." Behind them, the blip crossed into range, and the airlock, 3 decks down, began, with a sound like the universe clearing its throat, to cycle. The airlock finished cycling with a hiss that Benjamin felt in his teeth, and then the asterisk Meridian stopped being a ship they were fixing and became a ship they were fighting for. "How many?" he breathed. 4, maybe 5. Ellie had gone somewhere he couldn't follow, not far away, not haunted, but forward, into the shape she'd been built to be. Every soft thing they'd spent 3 days growing folded up and put away where it wouldn't get blood on it. Retrieval crews come light. They're not expecting resistance. A pause. They're not expecting me to have decided I'm worth resisting for. Is that new? Very. She pressed the knife's hilt into his hand, then produced a second from somewhere he chose not to think about. Life support's at 60. The scrubbers pull it to breathable in 6 minutes if we finish the cycle. There's a manual override in the aft junction, the one we rebuilt. Someone throws it, we breathe. Someone doesn't, we don't. Her eyes flicked to his, and for half a second the assassin blinked out and it was just Ellie. "You're the engineer. You get to the junction. I buy you the corridor. I'm not leaving you two. You're not leaving me. You're asterisk finishing the job." She almost smiled, and it broke his heart a little that even now she'd found the word he'd understand. "Trust the system, human. You built half of it. Go." Then the smoke came, a boarding charge, low and ugly, blowing the deck hatch and filling the corridor with the acrid fog that scavengers used to flush prey. And Ellie went into it like she was going home. He would spend the rest of his life, however long that turned out to be, trying to describe what he saw in that corridor and failing. She didn't fight the way people fought. She edited. The smoke was full of hard men with hard weapons and too much confidence. And one by one she removed them from the situation, precise and economical and terrible. A woman disarming the universe of its intentions. A rifle barked and she wasn't where it barked. A shape lunged and folded. She moved through them like a correction, like the ship's own grudge-given hands, and Benjamin, clutching a knife he had no idea how to use, understood with total clarity that everything she'd told him about herself was true, and that none of it was the point. Because she kept glancing back. That was the thing. In the middle of the most lethal 90 seconds he'd ever witnessed, she kept spending fractions of a second she couldn't afford to check that he was still upright, still moving toward the junction, still breathing asterisk. And he realized that this, exactly this, was what had killed the people before him. Not her curse, her caring. She'd never fought like this for herself. She fought like this for him, and it made her a half-beat slower, and the half-beat was going to cost her. It nearly did. A fifth man. There was always one more. Came out of the smoke behind her while she was watching Benjamin instead of the dark, blade already swinging, and Benjamin didn't decide to move so much as discover he already had. He hit the man low, clumsy, all panic and no craft, the two of them going down in a tangle of limbs and swearing, and it wasn't elegant and it wasn't lethal, but it was asterisk loud, and it was enough. It bought her the half-beat back. She turned. She finished it. Then it was just the two of them and the smoke and the ringing quiet after violence, and she was hauling him up by the collar, checking him for wounds with hands that had just done unspeakable arithmetic, and she was furious. "You were supposed to go to the junction," she snarled. "You were supposed to run. I told you to run, Benjamin, that was the one thing, the asterisk one thing." He caught her wrists, grinned at her, bloody and gasping and entirely himself. "It's too late," he said, and this time the words didn't glance off the door. This time they went all the way through, because she just watched him throw his soft, useless engineer's body into the dark to save hers, and there was no wall left standing that could pretend it hadn't happened. Her fury cracked. Underneath it was something that had been waiting her whole manufactured life to be let out, and it looked, on her lethal face, almost unbearably like hope. "You are the worst designed system in the universe," she said, and her voice was not steady. "No off switch," he agreed. "Told you. Junction's 40 meters. Oxygen's not going to override itself, and I'd really love to keep breathing near you for a while longer." She laughed, wet, startled, alive, and grabbed his hand, and they ran together through the smoke toward the aft junction, and the last 4 minutes on the counter. Two people who had both, finally, stopped running from the only thing that had ever tried to stay. The junction was where they'd left it, 40 meters and one small eternity down the smoke-choked corridor, and the override lever was exactly as stubborn as everything else aboard the asterisk Meridian. Benjamin threw his whole weight against it while Ellie stood at his back, knives out, watching the dark for the one more man there always was. The counter on the bulkhead had stopped being an abstraction. It was down to seconds now, big unfriendly numbers ticking toward a zero that meant something very specific about the contents of their lungs. "Any day now, human," Ellie said, and there was a thread of laughter in it, of all things, here at the bottom of the countdown. Fear had finally run out somewhere back in the smoke and left something lighter behind. "The lever," Benjamin gritted, "is asterisk reluctant. I respect that. I feel the same about mornings." The metal shrieked, gave a centimeter, gave another. Come on, you beautiful piece of junk. We rebuilt you, don't you dare." It went. All at once, the way stubborn things do, slamming home with a chunk that he felt in his spine, and for one horrible held breath nothing happened, nothing at all, just the two of them and the smoke and the zero arriving on the counter like a door closing. And then the ventilation fan spun up. That was all. That was the whole miracle. Somewhere in the walls, a fan he'd rewired with his own bloody hands began to turn, and then another, and the scrubbers coughed and caught and pulled, and cool, clean, breathable air came sighing out of the vents in a long exhale that smelled of nothing at all, which was the finest smell in the universe. The smoke began to thin. The counter blinked over to a number that had ceased to be a threat, and the two of them stood in the aft junction of a ship that had spent 3 days trying to kill them and breathed. Simple, stupid, ordinary breathing, in and out, the least remarkable act there is, and it felt like being handed back their entire lives. Ellie started to laugh. Really laugh, the kind that bends a person over, and Benjamin caught it like a cold. And there they were, two blood-smeared idiots howling in a wrecked corridor because a fan was working. It was, he thought, the least dignified he had ever been, and he would not have traded it for a planet. "We're not dead," she said, wonder breaking through the laughter, testing the words like she didn't trust them. "The oxygen's up, the crew's down, and we're not dead. Try not to sound so disappointed." "I'm not," she stopped. Looked at him. Really looked. The smoke curling away between them and the nebula's glow pouring back through the viewport now that the haze had cleared, washing the whole ruined corridor in that impossible purple and gold, pooling on her skin, catching in her dark hair, in the sharp, graceful points of those ears that were the only thing about her that had ever said asterisk elsewhere. And for once she didn't fold anything away. For once she just let him see her. "I spent my whole life certain of one thing," she said, quiet now, the laughter gone gentle. "That the safest thing I could do for anyone was leave before they got close enough to bury. I ran from everything. I was very good at it, best designed part of me." She reached up, hesitant, and pressed her palm flat against his chest, over the ridiculous, unkillable heart of him, and he felt her hand shake, and this time she let it. And then some idiot answered a distress call in a dead nebula and refused, absolutely refused, to run with asterisk me. Made me stop. Made me stay. Made me. Her voice caught. She let it. I don't know how to be loved, Benjamin. I was never built for it. There's no schematic. Lucky for you, he said, and covered her hand with his. I'm an engineer. I'm fantastic with systems nobody wrote the manual for. He was grinning, but his eyes weren't. His eyes were doing something else entirely. We'll figure it out. I'm patient. I've got. He glanced at the counter and its friendly, generous, no longer murderous number. Turns out I've got a lot of air. That was terrible. I'm your idiot, you knew the terms. She kissed him then, finally, at last, at the end of everything, in the glow of a nebula that had watched the whole slow business with its usual enormous indifference. And the void which had come so close, so many times, to swallowing them both, did not get to win. Outside the viewport it went on being vast and beautiful and uninterested. Inside, the fans hummed, the air moved, and a woman who had spent her whole life certain that love was a death sentence stood in the arms of the one heart brave enough to prove her wrong, and let herself, for the first time, be kept. Don't fall in love with me, human, she murmured against his mouth one last time, but there was no warning left in it now, only wonder. Benjamin smiled. It's too late, he said, and it was. Beautifully, permanently, wonderfully too late for both of them. Our story ends here, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. Please show your appreciation by pressing the like button, leaving your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribing to Sci-Fi Traveler for more stories. Goodbye.